Ashok Sapkota, who has collected lots of questions there. So he'll be asking you questions, I think orally many, and some others from the chat box as well. So Ashokji, please come over.
Thank you. Thank you, and a wonderful presentation by the Krashen. Thank you so much. And people, more than 300 plus in the Facebook Live, and 500 around 500 completely on Zoom. 800 plus people are watching you on both the media and personal Facebook Live as well. Quickly, let's have a question for you. You said no one is gifted. Why are some students good and some very weak in our classes, even though we provide same input and have same activities? Over to you, Krashen.
I think that's a wonderful experiment. Let's do it. Let's make sure it's identical, that all the input is optimal. Have we ever done that? Have we ever done a class in English where there's lots of reading material around, the material is fascinating, and students have total free choice? Mm-hmm. I don't think there has ever been a class like that. I'm very indebted to Professor Mason because she has stated these principles so clearly. Let's first make sure our classes are filled with optimal input. The hardest thing, access to interesting reading. We have to, number one, look at our libraries. Make sure there's lots of books. The problem with that, of course, is expense, money. And we're gradually solving this because more and more good books and interesting stories are online. They're there electronically. This is the big problem for me. It's finding the books.
Right.
When we solve that, everyone I have talked to, I know a lot of polyglots. 3 years ago, I went to a conference about polyglots, and the participants were all polyglots. I was the weakest polyglot in the group because I could only have conversations in maybe 5 or 6 languages. And these are people in 10, 15. I noticed, number one, they were all nice people, which is interesting. They were all fun to talk to. They were all supportive of each other. They had the affective part really down. They liked having conversations, and they were readers. Isn't that fascinating? Everyone I talked to, okay, they all had access to optimal input. So first, let's look at our classes. Let's look, that's why the situation that Dr. Mason, Benico Mason set up was optimal. A collection, let me repeat this, 5,000 graded readers available for students. This is wonderful. We look at, even if we're doing native language or we're doing English, official language of India, for example, do we have books available that are affordable? The highest level of low literacy, of course, is high poverty. They're the ones who can't get access to books. It is our job to do that. So my answer is, if we first make sure we have optimal input, then we can ask the question. So thank you, just right.
Thank you. There is one more question which is particularly concerned with the remote learning. How do we use or how do we engage the students of remote areas in learning? Can you relate your ideas with input hypothesis?
Yes, I think we can do it. It's a good area for experimentation, of course.
Yeah.
What really counts in language acquisition, input, we can supply that. For example, the initial stage of language teaching in Dr. Mason's method is stories. Listening to very compelling stories and knowing the students' stories, going to great efforts to make them interesting and comprehensible. In Dr. Mason's classes, drawing pictures. She can explain words that she knows are going to be hard in advance, and we have lots of that. Now, in remote learning, the students can't talk, doesn't matter. We don't need them to talk because that's not how you acquire language. How do you like that? They can't interrupt and say, I don't understand, I don't understand. Well, if the story is too hard, we do what we do when we watch television. We change the station. I would like language classes to focus on good stories. stories that are of universal interest, and allow options. Like if you're listening to a good story in an English class or a French class, you have the option of 20 different stories at 20 different levels and on 20 different topics. You don't have to stay with that one. You're not tested on the content of the story. You can listen for pleasure the same way we change the station watching television. In fact, remote learning might be just made to demonstrate the power of stories. That's the beginning stage. And we introduce students to where they can find good books. And we have the power, we have the essence of the proper method. Dr. Mason's method combines listening to stories and reading for pleasure, self-selected. We can do that, no problem. The stuff that we can't do never did us any good anyway. So I think that's the answer, stories and pleasure reading.
Here, Ashokji, can I ask a question here?
Please,
I found it interesting. It's about writing. Our tradition of evaluating writing is only from the final product, and then the process is hardly given due importance. So, what's your suggestion on this authentic evaluation of writing when final product has the grades?
Don't evaluate writing at all. I just saved you hundreds of billions of hours of torture. Number one, it's the hardest thing to do. We have very poor inter-rater reliability. It tortures the students. They hate it. It tortures the graders. Nobody likes to do that. Oh God, I gotta grade this writing thing, etc. Encourages more writing, and that doesn't help you. So forget it. Problem solved.
Oh, I see. Then there is a same question linked with just what you said. In this situation, how can we encourage our students in academic writing then?
We encourage them by, here's what someone once said. I forgot who, I'd like to quote them. Read what you like, write what you must. We should never require writing of anybody unless it's something that burns inside of you. Now, the people listening today, the 500 people, most of you love to write because you're academics, teachers, you get ideas, you like to write them down. It's not for everybody. If you fall in love with writing an idea and you find that when you write it down, you get a clearer idea, keep diaries. Oh my, everybody knows this. This is so powerful. You have a problem, a personal problem. You write it down immediately. 10% of the problem disappears immediately, maybe even more. That's why people keep diaries. It's helped me, it's helped you. When we introduce students to the composing process, I think we should tell them about the composing process. They will be drawn to writing, and their writing quality will get better as they read more. Simple solutions. We want to make the world a more pleasant place.
Thank you. Can I ask one more question, please?
Please, no extra charge. Go ahead.
With reverence, you said that something is learned with good input. You said that something is learned with good input. If input is not changed into intake, we normally write and practice for intake. In our case, we believe this. And what's your thought over
the
this?
optimal input is intake. That's what it is. And it helps us to acquire language, not to learn it, to acquire it subconsciously. Intake is optimal input. Our goal is input that's fascinating, so interesting that you don't even know it's in another language. That's why I like to allow lots of choice. In stories, we can't do that perfectly, but we can come close. If in beginning language teaching, there's variety in the stories, and the student can select the kind of story the student wants to listen to. Mm-hmm. Not everybody likes fairy tales, okay? Not everybody wants to know Grimm stories, etc. But you can select what you like. And then when you start reading, you read narrowly and you select what you want. what I do with I've done with myself, and you've done it too. I use reading 95% to keep up on my languages and improve. I do a lot of, rather learned this from Lom Kato. All her reading is in other languages, not all her pleasure reading, which is why she can keep them up. And I find the authors that are perfect for me. By the way, I don't like it when people recommend books to me. To me, when someone says, or they give me a book as a gift, oh my gosh, someone gives you a book as a gift, then they ask you a week later, how did you like the book I gave you? I never read them. I have to select the book. I never give people books as gifts. I let them select their own books, same with my children. Well, there's one exception. There's one person, when he recommends a book, I always read it immediately because he knows me. He knows me better than I know myself. And he's always right. And that's my son, the math professor. He says, Dad, read this one. He's always right. And we have people in our lives who can do that. But in general, assigned reading is the problem. Now, this means some change in how we teach. I can't help that. I'm not here to make the current teaching program work. I'm here to try to try to tell you what the research says about the optimal way. And I think we can gradually move in that direction. The more self-selected reading, the more bigger our libraries, the more choice, the better off we're going to be.
Okay, thank you. Now, we have our most senior professor, Professor Zaraj Avasthi, who was one of the founding members of NELTA, our ELT association, and also other Professor Govind Bhattrai, and I think Ganga Gautam and others are here. Abhi Subedi also is the first speaker. So they would like to perhaps ask you something or share with you something. Shall I invite them?
Yes, okay, good.
Yes, sir. Professor Avasthi, sir.
Thank you, Steve. It was such a wonderful presentation. I've been following your delivery from Morocco, and it's still on September 2 with Professor Chomsky.
Oh my, isn't that amazing?
I have fond memory of studying with Professor Salinker and Professor Susan Gass. Susan Gass was very young when I was a grad student at Michigan. And later on, when I did my postdoctoral research on second language studies, she was distinguished professor at MSU, where I did my postdoctoral in second language studies. So to be honest, I mean, we did not have SLA course in Nepal, and then we had psycholinguistics and then sociolinguistics, and then I taught that course for about 22 years. And then, you know, we had Lenneberg, all these things you were talking about, where he was right, where he was wrong, and I absolutely agree with what you said. So it was, you know, after I came back from Michigan, we introduced SLA, and you were always in our head. So 1983 books, your book with Tracy Terrell. So we introduced all this, and later on, Sugyas and Salinker's introduction to SLA. And then Rod Ellis came on NELTA conference, so we recommended some of Rod Ellis's book also. As my colleagues were asking you, you know, as in Nepal, we assess the students on their writing. That's very important. And then also we recommend the books, read this, that. I do that also, which may be completely wrong. I asked my students, please read 300 books for my course, which I did for the last 46 years or so before I got retired. But, you know, SLA has been a part of our whole academia. I became a vice chancellor of a university where I founded it, and I introduced SLA there. SLA in my own, university, and where I'm like Lakshmanji's university, where he's associate dean. So I taught SLA last semester. He wanted me to teach at the master's level, though I was teaching to the research level students. So the problem here is, you know, still people get confused with input, then process, and then output also. So could you please tell us, you know, how we start with input and proceed to process, and then finally get out of it, that's output, very briefly. not very elaborately perhaps. And
Well,
so happy, Steve. You know, I was in California last year, stayed in San Diego. My daughter is a dentist there. And
oh,
then she got married last year. Before that, I was there with my wife, and we took an Airbnb just opposite of Stu, I think, and then stayed there for 24 days. Wonderful place. And then definitely we'll visit again to San Diego because my daughter is planning to have a house there very soon. So love to come to LA. I was in Los Angeles, UCLA, and then my daughter lives nearby University of California, San Diego, just 5 minutes walk from her residence. So could you please tell us, I mean, whether the process of input, process, and then output, can we take in a string or just to give emphasis on input only, which is comprehensible, as you said?
well, it depends. If you're doing serious psycholinguistics, which I'm not interested in, you have to worry about what goes on in the mind as you do that, etc. For us, working in language, all we have to know is what is optimal input. That's really all you have to know. And that's what our students have to know. That's what our potential teachers have to know, and language acquisition, people who are acquiring language. We don't have to go too deeply into the neurology of the brain, the psychology of the brain. The big breakthrough, compelling, comprehensible input, a lot of it, and it needs to be rich. This is really the depth of my understanding. In the old days, I did a lot of neurolinguistics, brain studies, etc. But we don't really need that anymore. I think we've made the fundamental breakthrough, and we should work with that. By the way, you mentioned Chomsky, Lenneberg. I have to put in one thought. I did have a conversation with Professor Chomsky a couple of months ago. It's on YouTube. My colleague, Dushan Ashtari, recorded and arranged it. It was very good. I got to tell you, that was one of the great, as you can imagine, professional thrills of my life, talking to the master, Chomsky, and I was able to thank him for all the work he's done. We had an interesting conversation about Erich Lenneberg. My dissertation basically showed that Lenneberg was wrong about the neurological basis of the critical period. But the conversation with Professor Chomsky, what we agreed is, there's nothing wrong with being wrong. And that Lenneberg gave us a huge contribution. We both admire Lenneberg. His hypothesis was not correct, that there's a neurological basis for the critical period. But the question was right, and it stimulated the correct and right research. It pushed us forward enormously. And when I got my result that Lenneberg's analysis was incorrect, I sent it to him. He responded immediately and he said, "You're right, I agree with you." So this is the kind of people that we have in our profession. There's nothing wrong with being wrong, and what we want is progress. And that should encourage us to make bold hypotheses and be happy if they're wrong, because that means we're progressing. So, and Chomsky, oh my God, what a guy.
Okay, thank you. I would like to invite, thank you,